Chapter 1. Ambushes. The ambush is a favorite tactic of the guerrilla since it allows him to mass forces covertly, attack the enemy, seize needed supplies, and retreat before the enemy can effectively react. The ambush has long been part of the Afghan warrior tradition and has been a key feature of historic Afghan warfare, whether fighting other tribes, the British, or the government. The Mujahideen ambush served to attack the Soviet DRA lines of communication, provided needed supplies, and forced the bulk of Soviet DRA maneuver forces to perform security missions. Logistics were key to the conduct of the Soviet-Afghan War, and Mujahideen ambushes threatened the resupply of Soviet and DRA forces and limited the number of Soviet troops that could be deployed into the country. The Mujahideen ambush was their most effective counter to Soviet DRA military activity and threatened the ability of the Soviets and DRA to prosecute the war. Vignette 1. Ambushes at the Mamur Hotel by Commander Mohammed Akbar. A day seldom passed without a clash between the Mujahideen and the Soviets or DRA in Logar Province. In the summer of 1980, my group set an ambush to attack a supply column of Soviet and DRA forces moving from Kabul to Gardez on Highway 157. At that time, the populace had not migrated from the area, and it was full of people. The Mujahideen had contacts in the government who reported on the movement of columns along the main highway. This was to be our first attack on a major column on this highway following the Soviet invasion. The ambush site was located around the Pul-e-Kundahari junction with the main highway. At this point, the Logar River comes within 200 meters of the highway to the east, and the Kui Mohammed Aga hills rise some 700 meters over the highway to the west. 10 kilometers to the south, the road runs through a steep gorge where vehicles cannot easily turn back. Map 1, Mamur 1. We had 50 Mujahideen armed with Mosin Nagant carbines, Enfield rifles, and 2 RPG-7s. Our leader, Commander Hayat, divided our men into 3 groups and put one group in the Bini Shiragaf ruins some 70 meters west of the road. He put the second group to the east of the road around the Mamur Hotel and put the third group to the east in Pul-e-Kundahari, facing the Muhammad Aga High School. Our ambush occupied a 2-kilometer stretch. At this time, I was the late Commander Hayat's deputy commander, commanding the Pul-e-Kundahari positions. Commander Hayat ordered that the attack would start when the end of the column reached the Bin Shigirfin ruins. The DRA column came. It had about 100 vehicles carrying food, ammunition, and fuel. There were quite a few POL tankers in the column. We let it pass, and as the end of the column reached the ruins, we started to attack at the end of the column. In those days, convoy escort was very weak and air support was insufficient. There was practically no resistance or reaction to our attack from the column. Even the APCs, which were escorting the column, were passive. We left our positions and started moving up the column, firing as we went, and damaged or destroyed almost all the vehicles. We had no casualties. I don't know how many DRA casualties there were, but we wounded many drivers who the government evacuated later. We left the area promptly after the ambush. The area around the Mamur Hotel was ideal for an ambush, and we and other Mujahideen groups used it often. In September 1981, we set an ambush at the Mamur Hotel and in Pul-e-Kundahari facing the high school. The Mamur Hotel group was commanded by the noted HIH commander Dr. Abdul Wali Kayat, and the Pul-e-Kundahari position was commanded by my commander, the late Commander Hayat. There were some 35 Mujahideen armed with AK-47 rifles and 3 RPG-7s. The ambush site occupied about 1 kilometer of roadway. When the column arrived, we destroyed 12 trucks and captured 3 intact. The 3 trucks were large, heavy-duty, 8-cylinder trucks, and they were loaded with beans, rice, and military boots. We needed all this gear. We also captured 2 76mm field guns and a heavier gun that I don't know the type of caliber. We did not have any Mujahideen casualties. In July 1982, the late Dr. Wali Kayat set an ambush near the Mamur Hotel. A Soviet column, moving supplies from Kabul to Gardez, entered the ambush kill zone. During the attack, one Mujahideen fired an RPG-7 at an escorting APC. It hit the APC, and a Soviet officer jumped out of the damaged APC and took cover. The officer was wounded. While the fighting was going on, the column sped up and left the ambush area, and left the officer behind. Dr. Abdul Wali Kayat fired at the position where the Soviet officer was. The Soviet officer returned fire with his AK-74. Dr. Kayat fired again and wounded the Soviet officer a second time, this time in the hand. The Soviet officer dropped his AK-74 and took out his pistol. Dr. Kayat threw a hand grenade at the officer and killed him. Then we crossed the road and took his AK-74 and his Makarov pistol. He left the body where it lay, and the Mujahideen left the ambush site. The next day, the Soviets returned in a column from Kabul. They cordoned off the area and searched the houses around Muhammad Agha district headquarters and the town of Kotobekel. They went house to house looking for their missing officer. HIH commander Sama Jan was in Kotobekel at the time. He coordinated and organized the actions of all the Mujahideen factions which were caught in the cordon. There were about 150 Mujahideen caught in the cordon. The Mujahideen began attacking the searching Soviets. They launched sudden, surprise attacks in the close streets and alleys of the villages and in the spaces between the villages. The fighting was often at point-blank range. The fighting began in the morning and continued until the late afternoon. Map 2, Mamur 2. Soviet casualties are unknown, but we think that they were heavy. The Mujahideen captured 4 AK-74s. Mujahideen casualties were 7 KIA, including Samajan. Most of the dead Mujahideen had run out of ammunition. The Soviets captured the weapons of the dead Mujahideen, including some AK-47s, a Goryanov machine gun, an RPG-7, and a few AK-74s captured from the Soviets in the past. As the Soviets got involved in fighting, they stopped searching. As daylight waned, the Soviets disengaged, took their dead, and withdrew back to Kabul. They did find and evacuate the body of their officer who Dr. Kayat killed the day before. It was still lying where he was killed. Vignette 2. Yet another ambush at the Mamur Hotel by Toriale Hamat. My mobile regiment fought in many provinces in Afghanistan during the war. One of our battles was in Muhammad Agha district of Logar province. The jihad began here, attacking columns between Gardez and Kabul. This action occurred on 8th July 1986. It was a joint action with the HIH Mujahideen commander by Dr. Wali Kayat and was reported in the media. It was a small ambush involving 13 Mujahideen armed with 2 RPG-7s, 1 PK machine gun, and 10 AK-47s. 7 of the Mujahideen were my men and 6 were HIH. We set the ambush in Kotobekel near the Mamur Hotel, which sits beside the main highway. I split the force into 2 groups. I put a 6-man group on the east side of the road along the Logar riverbank. At this point, the river is some 40 meters from the road and some 2 meters lower than the surrounding ground. This side is by the hotel. I put my 7-man group on the west side of the road on high ground. This side is a little further to the south, about 150 meters from the hotel. The high ground is known as Gumbazo Mazagani by the locals. There was an RPG-7 at both sites. We had instructed the group that if the column came from Kabul, the furthest group, the western group on the high ground, would fire first to get the column into the kill zone. That would be the riverside signal to fire. We prepared our high ground positions in a ditch which was not visible from the road. It is some 200 meters from the road. We camouflaged our positions well. Map 3, Mamur 3. Our base was 3 kilometers southeast of Muhammad Agha, south of the village of Kala-i-Shahi near Ahmadzi Kala. We moved from Ahmadzi Kala at midnight. It took us 1 hour to reach the ambush site. I was with the western group. We took our positions in the ditch. At that time, there was fighting in Paktia province, Jajai district, and the enemy was moving reinforcements to the area. In the morning, a reinforcing column came. We opened fire when it reached us, and the eastern ambush site opened up as well. We destroyed or damaged 2 armored vehicles, 3 jeeps, and 8 trucks. Some trucks turned back to Kabul, and others were abandoned. There were some intact abandoned trucks outside the kill zone. Dead and wounded lay on the ground. Only damaged vehicles were left in the kill zone. We had no casualties. In one of the jeeps, we found some movie projectors. We also captured 11 AKs, 2 pistols, and 1 heavy machine gun, which was mounted on an armored vehicle. We took what we could and split the spoils. HIH got all the projectors. We left and went to Wazir Kala, some 4 kilometers away. Helicopter gunships came and fired at our old positions. 4 Soviet helicopters came and took away their dead and wounded. We stayed in Wazir Kala for 2 or 3 hours. The helicopters were bombing and strafing the positions all of this time. In the late afternoon, when everything settled down, we returned to the area to search and see what was left. We removed the heavy machine gun and projectors at this time. We stopped a passing bus and asked the passengers for matches. At first they refused, not wanting to be accomplices, so we searched their pockets and got some matches and set fire to the damaged vehicles. 2 days later, the Soviets sent a force to search our old positions. Of the 13 men in the ambush, only Barayeli, Asaf of HIH, and I survived the war. Commentary. Both the Soviets and Mujahideen set patterns. The Mujahideen used the Mamre Hotel ambush site over and over again, yet apparently the Soviets or DRA seldom dismounted troops to search the area to spoil the ambush or to try to set a counter-ambush. This last example is from 1986, yet there seems to be no learning curve on the part of the Soviets. Air support is tardy, artillery fire is unavailable, and there is no reserve to move against the ambush. Aggressive patrolling, specially trained counter-ambush forces, and priority counter-ambush intelligence are lacking. The standard Soviet DRA counter-ambush techniques include an aerial patrol in front of the column, an engineer sweep in front of the column looking for mines, armored vehicle in front of the column, occasional armored vehicles throughout the column, and a robust rear guard. Once hit, the armored vehicles in the column would return fire while the soft-skinned vehicles tried to drive out of the kill zone. Seldom would the ambushed force dismount forces to clear the ambush site and pursue the ambush party. The Mujahideen did vary ambush positions in the same ambush site. Their primary concern was to hit the column where it was weakest, usually in the middle or rear, unless the purpose was to bottle up the column. In most ambushes, a small number of highly mobile Mujahideen were able to move and attack with little logistic support, but were unable to conduct a sustained fight. The RPG-7 was probably the most effective weapon of the Mujahideen. When used at close quarters with the element of surprise, it was devastating. In this region, Mujahideen ambushes occupied a very wide front. This was a function of the open terrain and the spacing between convoy vehicles. Convoy SOP was to maintain 100 meters or more between vehicles. In order to have enough vehicles in the kill zone to make an ambush worthwhile, the Mujahideen had to constitute a kill zone much bigger than that employed by most Western armies. Vignette 3. Ambush south of the Tangai Wagjan Gorge by Haji Syed Mohammed Hanif. In May 1981, we joined other Mujahideen for an ambush in Kolangar district, Logar province, map 4 Kolangar. We were 11 Mujahideen with an RPG-7, 7 Kalashnikovs, and 2 Enfields. We moved into the area the night before, spent the night in a village, and set up our ambush site the next morning north of Kolangar district headquarters. We were told that a column was coming from Kabul to Gardez, and so we had time to set up during the daylight before the column arrived, since the convoys always left Kabul in the morning well after dawn. Kabul is about 50 kilometers north of the ambush site. We set our ambush just south of the Tangji Wagjan Gorge. There, the river continues to run parallel to the road and restricts maneuver while providing better firing positions for the ambush force. We had a collapsed electric pylon that we stretched across the road as a roadblock. We put in an RPG firing position for Mullah Latif, our RPG gunner, and put 2 other Mujahideen on the edge of the river in positions. Then we set up the rest of our positions and went to some nearby houses for breakfast. At that time, we were so popular with the population that we didn't have to worry about supplies, and the people were always feeding us in their homes or sending us prepared food. Mullah Latif left his RPG at the ambush position since the people were moving about freely and would keep an eye on things. As we were leisurely enjoying our breakfast, some people came into the house and said that the convoy was coming from the north. This was at about 1000 hours. While we were running to our positions, the lead tank in the column came to our roadblock. The tank driver stopped his tank, got out of the tank, and moved the barrier. We'd gotten back into his tank and driven past as we reached our positions. Mullah Latif was breathing heavily as he picked up his RPG-7 and fired at the next tank. His first shot missed. He reloaded, fired again, and missed again. He was still breathing too heavily to aim accurately. He then reloaded, jumped out of position, and ran down to the road. He then sat down in the middle of the road and fired at the tank from close range. He hit the tank this time and it burst into flames. The column was just coming out of the narrow Tangi Wagjan Gorge. This burning tank stopped the convoy since there was no room to maneuver or pass. Other Mujahideen from other areas and groups ran to the area and moved up the gorge by the trapped column and started firing at the vehicles. There was not much resistance from this supply convoy. The column consisted of 150 to 200 trucks full of many things such as food and furniture. Whatever we could take away, we did. Hundreds of Mujahideen came and looted the column. We captured 15 trucks from my group, which we eventually moved to our base in Duraut Canyon. We torched the vehicles we could not take and left the area around 1300 hours. After we had finished, helicopters and aircraft came and bombed some areas around the ambush site. Despite our lack of warning when the lead vehicle came toward our ambush site, the ambush turned out well. There is a reason why we were not in our positions when the column came. Prior to any ambush, we would select and prepare our ambush positions, but we would not occupy them since helicopters would always overfly the route ahead of the convoy looking for ambushes and roadblocks. Normally, we would not have put out the roadblock until after the flyover, but for some reason this time we did. The helicopter flyover was our usual tip-off that the convoy was coming, and our signal to put out the roadblock and occupy our positions. The helicopters did not do their road sweep in front of this particular convoy. I later learned why the helicopters were absent. DRA President Babak Karmal was flying to Moscow that day, and so the DRA had imposed a no-fly zone over Kabul. This meant that helicopters were either grounded or had to refuel at Ghazni. The helicopters were not available to do the sweep. Commentary. The Mujahideen were quick to key on Soviet and DRA tactical patterns and procedures and came to rely on them. As a result, Mujahideen reactions to these patterns were often stereotyped, but the Soviets and DRA evidently did not always pick up on Mujahideen patterns or ensure that the relevant tactical commanders got the word. In this case, the Tangi Wagjan Gorge is an obvious choke point and ambush area. The convoy commander needed to send reconnaissance security elements ahead of the convoy to secure the gorge's entry, high ground, and exit prior to moving the convoy into the gorge, but he did not. His lead armored vehicle spotted the roadblock and removed it. This should have served as a warning, but the convoy commander already had the leading part of the convoy driving through the gorge. Depending on initial vehicle interval and the commander's ability to stop the convoy from bunching up, some 70 to 150 vehicles may have been caught in the 3-kilometer gorge. The drivers were dependent on firepower to rescue them, but the convoy was unable to bring firepower to bear to save the columns. Helicopters have an important role in convoy security, not only as scouts but as a rapid reaction force and as a lift force to move security elements from one piece of dominant high ground to the next. The lack of helicopters deprived the convoy of needed warning and firepower. The Mujahideen needed radios and early warning pickets to alert ambush forces about the approach of convoys and aircraft. At this point of the war, few Mujahideen had tactical radio communications. Vignette 4. Ambush at Kanday by Dr. Mohammed Sadiq. We fought the DRA and Soviets for control of the Kunar Valley. The area borders Pakistan and is very mountainous and forested. Many of the mountains are over 5,000 meters high and are permanently snow-capped. We operated in Shiwad district along the Kunar River. There, the mountains are not as high, and the key terrain features in the Kunar River and the highway which parallels it. In September 1982, we ambushed a supply column which was traveling from Jalalabad to Kunar, Map 5, Kanday. The column was about 8 kilometers in length. I had 22 Mujahideen armed with 2 RPG-7s, 4 AK-47 Kalashnikovs, and 16 bolt-action Enfield rifles. I set up the ambush on the high ground north of the Kunar River at Kanday. I divided my force into a support group and an ambush and attack group. The support group was on the high ground while the ambush and attack group was below them next to the road. When the column came, we let it pass. I wanted to attack near the end of the column. As the head of the column reached Ziriaba, which is 6 kilometers northeast of Kanday, a contact signaled us. We then opened fire on the column with our RPGs. An armored vehicle turned off and left the road to fire at us. It hit an anti-tank mine that we had planted there. We also hit it with RPG-7 fire. We also hit a ZIL truck. Our action split the convoy. Half of the convoy went on to Kunar, and the rest returned to Jalalabad. We didn't have enough firepower to continue the fight, so we withdrew. Besides taking out the armored vehicle and truck, we killed 6 enemy. I had 1 Mujahideen wounded. Commentary. Deciding where to ambush a convoy is usually driven by geography, intent, and escape routes. The Soviet DRA convoy commander was primarily concerned with not being on the road at night and delivering the bulk of his cargo on time. He did not want to fight a long, involved battle with guerrillas. If the terrain at the ambush site is very constricted, the guerrilla army may want to attack the head of the convoy and block the route with a combination of a roadblock and burning vehicles. If the convoy has armored vehicles and engineer vehicles concentrated to the front of the convoy, the guerrilla may want to attack the middle or tail of the convoy with the hope that the convoy commander will not divert a great deal of combat power back to deal with this attack. If the guerrilla is after supplies, the middle of the convoy is best if he can isolate a piece of the middle, since most convoys have a rear guard. In this case, the purpose of the ambush was to harass, not to capture supplies. The ambush site was fairly constricted due to the proximity of the river and the road to the high ground, but it still allowed armored vehicles to turn around in the area. The ambush commander decided to attack toward the rear of the convoy, but far enough forward to avoid the rear guard. Vignette 5. Ambush on the Jalalabad-Asadabad Road by Lieutenant Colonel Haji Mohammed Rahim. The Jalalabad-Asadabad Road runs right by the mouth of the Babur Valley, which we nicknamed Islamdara, the Valley of Islam. I had my base in the valley with 150 Mujahideen, 1 82mm recoilless rifle, 3 DSHK heavy machine guns, a Goryunov medium machine gun, 5 RPG-7s, some Kalashnikovs, and some Enfields. I decided to set the ambush at the mouth of the valley. It was December 1984. The area is perfect for an ambush. Map 6 Babur. The mouth of the valley allows a U-shaped ambush with a 1,000-meter kill zone. The forested valley allows a quick escape into the forested mountains. I positioned the Dishka machine guns on the high ground and put the 5 RPGs and the recoilless rifle close to the road. I had 3 positions for my force: the bottom of Spira Gar facing southwest, the valley floor, and the ridge of Shumkole Gar facing south and southeast. I put myself in the center in the valley floor position where I could best control the ambush. I had good fields of fire to both sides of the ambush site. The terrain is close and prevented the enemy from massing fires against the ambush. The river prevented the enemy from maneuvering effectively against the site. The withdrawal routes were all covered. A supply convoy came from Jalalabad. We let part of it pass to attack the middle of the convoy. When we opened fire, the enemy was hit from 3 directions. We destroyed 3 armored vehicles and 1 truck fully loaded with melons and other fruit, and 1 truck full of boxes of cash. Some enemy tried to flee, but were trapped by the river, which has many channels in this area. The money truck caught on fire and some of the money was burned, but we took what we could, and later I made it a payday for everyone. I still have some of those burnt notes, and someday I will cash them in for some good ones. The enemy tried to fight back and maneuver against us, but he could not find any favorable positions. Eventually, enemy helicopter gunships came and forced us out of position. Our concealed withdrawal routes through the trees protected us from the gunships. Samajan Hejran from Chakdara was killed. He was a teacher. I also had 1 WIA. The enemy losses are unknown since they evacuated their dead. The following day, the DRA came and towed the damaged armored vehicles away. Commentary. The Mujahideen were unpaid volunteers, so the money truck was a real boon. Mujahideen still had to support their families, so normally all heavy weapons and 1/5 of the loot from an ambush or raid went to the commander. The other 4/5 was divided among the Mujahideen combatants. Some Mujahideen would take their captured Kalashnikovs to Pakistan, where they would sell them and give the money to their families to live on. Governments supporting the Mujahideen would buy the weapons in Pakistan's bazaars and give them to Mujahideen faction leaders for distribution. Lieutenant Colonel Rahim's military professionalism shows throughout his vignette. His ambush laid down is by the book and very effective. He might have blown the bridge in the middle of the kill zone, but that would have meant that a guarded bridge repair crew would be near his base camp for an indefinite period of time, impeding his freedom of movement.